The pregnant woman moved into her newly purchased house and discovered a horrifying truth.
Hello everyone, enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
Elizabeth Foster, recently pregnant, had just moved with her husband, Robert Davis, into a 3-story Victorian house in the northern suburbs of Boston. The iron gate creaked open to reveal a small, waterlogged yard. Elizabeth stepped out of the car, pulling her coat tightly around her and turned to her husband. "My God, Robert, that smell. Do you smell it?" she grimaced. "Yeah, probably because the house has been vacant for a few months." "I'll open all the windows in a bit to air it out," Robert replied, his hand trembling as he fumbled with the keys to unlock the front door. They stepped inside, and immediately a blast of cold, damp air hit their faces. The musty odor clung to the walls like mold to a cellar. Weak light filtered through the dusty glass panes, just enough to reveal the groaning of the old wooden floorboards beneath their feet. The gray, stained walls looked almost like diseased skin. Elizabeth shivered. "Are you sure? Are we really going to live here?" she asked, her voice full of doubt. "You know we couldn't afford anything in the city. With our budget, this is the best option." "You'll get used to it, I promise," Robert said, trying to smile. Elizabeth gave a slight nod, though something inside her felt off. She couldn't explain it, but from the moment she stepped inside, something felt wrong. That evening, they had a simple meal of ham sandwiches in the cold, cluttered kitchen. Robert chatted cheerfully about work, while Elizabeth stayed quiet. When he went to shower, she quietly wandered through the house. The first floor had 3 rooms, a large living room, a small office, and a library. She was drawn to the library, the only room that seemed relatively preserved. The bookshelf stretched to the ceiling, covered in dust but otherwise intact. She ran her fingers carefully along the spines until the faint yellow light revealed something strange. Behind the west bookshelf, there seemed to be a gap. Elizabeth tilted her head, frowning. She tried pushing the bookshelf gently. It didn't budge. Looking closer, she noticed a crack at the base of the wood, as if it had been dragged before. Gathering her courage, she stepped back and shoved hard with both hands. A loud thud echoed. The bookshelf shifted slightly, revealing a small reddish-brown wooden door, unlocked. "Robert," she called out, but only the sound of running water answered. Elizabeth grasped the rusted brass handle. Her hand trembled, both from the cold and an unnamed sense of dread. The door creaked open, revealing a stone staircase leading downward. No lights. No windows. Just darkness and a chill rising from the earth. She hesitated for a few seconds, then went back to get her phone for the flashlight. As the faint beam illuminated the steps, a pungent smell of mold, rotting wood, and something metallic rushed up to meet her. Covering her nose, she began to descend. The basement was a narrow, enclosed space with a low ceiling and rusted steel support beams. She swept the flashlight around, her heart pounding. "Shit," she muttered. The left stone wall was covered in deep, chaotic scratch marks. As if fingernails, no, claws had raked across it over and over. The marks were long, uneven, and deep, some still bearing strange black stains. Elizabeth stepped closer and gently touched one of the grooves. A chill ran down her spine. Then she noticed a torn piece of cloth stuck in a crack, an old, rotted gray sweater. "Robert! Come down here," she shouted, her voice slightly shaking. Robert appeared moments later, his hair still wet, wearing his robe. "What is it? Look at these marks. It's like someone was trapped down here, and tried to escape." Robert shone his phone's flashlight and frowned. "Could be stray cats, or a large rat." "You're overthinking it." "A rat? A rat made these?" She stared at him incredulously. "You're just stressed. First day in a new house, plus the storm, it's natural. Get some sleep, you'll feel better in the morning." Elizabeth fell silent. She felt dismissed, brushed aside. But inside, her anxiety only grew. As she stood up to leave the basement, her phone died. Darkness swallowed them instantly. "Robert? Where's the light?" she called out. Robert turned on his flashlight, but the dim glow barely lit a few steps ahead. "Battery's low. Let's go back up. I'll check the power tomorrow." They climbed the stairs in silence. Elizabeth felt something trailing behind her. A cold breath. A faint whisper. She turned nothing. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the window panes, and rain pounded the roof like rhythmic knocks. She watched Robert sleep peacefully beside her, full of doubt. The next morning, Elizabeth decided to call an old friend, Lucy Owen, an architect and historical restoration specialist. "Lucy, are you busy? I need you to come take a look at this house. Something's not right. I'm working in Salem right now, but if you need me, I can come by this afternoon. Text me the address." That afternoon, Lucy arrived. She was a petite, energetic woman with short hair and sharp eyes. "Wow, this place was built in the late 1800s. Natural stone, original wood framing, but seriously damp," Lucy commented as she walked around the ground floor. "What about the basement? Anything strange down there?" Elizabeth asked. Lucy used her professional flashlight and carefully descended into the basement. She examined every scratch and crack. "Elizabeth, are you sure no one lived here before you moved in?" "I'm not sure. Robert bought it through a real estate company. They said it had been vacant since early last year." Lucy frowned and pointed to a small hole in the basement ceiling. "This is an old ventilation duct. But the mesh was cut. Someone either wanted to communicate with the outside or escape." Elizabeth swallowed hard. "Do you think someone was imprisoned here?" Lucy didn't answer right away. She took several photos with a specialized camera, then turned to Elizabeth. "I don't want to scare you, but something's definitely wrong. I'll look into the property records and history of this place." "Thank you, Lucy." "Really?" Lucy squeezed her hand, then returned to her car, leaving Elizabeth alone at the basement door. She looked down into the deep darkness where the claw marks still scarred the walls and once again felt like invisible eyes were watching her. The next day, it was still drizzling. Elizabeth quietly moved the bookshelf aside again, careful not to leave any signs for Robert. When she reopened the basement entrance, she paused. Her phone flashlight was now fully charged, and this time she descended more decisively. The basement remained the same, overwhelming mildew, cold stone walls. But when she swept her light around, something new caught her attention. In the far right corner, near a large metal column, was a dusty wooden chest. Elizabeth approached, her palms sweating. The chest had a lock, but it was heavily rusted. She forced it open with effort, the lid creaking loudly. Inside were old items, documents, a few leather-bound journals, and a black and white photograph sealed in a plastic sleeve. "Weird," she murmured, her hands trembling as she picked up the photo. It showed a family of 4, father, mother, 2 children. But what chilled Elizabeth wasn't the composition, it was the man's expression in the center. His eyes were hollow, as if staring through the aged photo directly at her. A cold, almost hateful gaze. On the back of the photo were faint words, "Julian Parker 1978. "Julian Parker? The previous owner," she whispered. Elizabeth opened the leather journals. They were diaries. The first page dated back to February 1976. The handwriting was neat at first, but grew increasingly erratic and shaky. She flipped through, reading silently. "They promised they'd protect me. But I don't trust them. Yesterday, the black car was parked outside again. Helen is scared. I'm scared too. Mustn't let them find out. Mustn't let anyone know. If they discover I'm writing this." Some lines were so violently scratched out they tore through the pages. Like the writer had lost his mind. Elizabeth flipped faster, panic growing. Near the end, she read something that made her heart stop. Helen told me to confess, but it's too late. They're coming tonight. I'm hiding everything. If anyone finds this, please don't stay here. She slammed the journal shut, palms damp with sweat. Elizabeth? Where are you? Robert's voice echoed from upstairs. Elizabeth took a deep breath. In the basement. I'm looking at some old stuff. Robert came down, frowning. Why are you so obsessed with this place? You need rest. Look, Elizabeth said, showing him the journal and photo. I found these in the wooden chest. They belonged to Julian Parker. And it seems like, he was scared. This house isn't what you think it is. Robert glanced at the photo and shrugged. People back then wrote dramatic stuff in journals. I think he was just paranoid. Elizabeth stepped back, disappointed. Don't you see anything strange? Don't you feel the way that man in the photo is staring right at you? Robert sighed. Come on, don't let your imagination run wild. This is just an old house, nothing more. Robert's words made Elizabeth feel as if she were shouting into a void. A creeping loneliness sank into her, along with a fear that was becoming harder to ignore. She carefully placed everything back into the chest and silently made her way upstairs, saying nothing more. That night, Elizabeth called Lucy, her voice trembling. Lucy. I found Julian Parker's journals. He knew he was being watched. Maybe his family didn't just disappear randomly. Lucy was quiet for a few seconds before answering. I'm going through records, but a lot of files are missing. However, I found someone who might help Mr. Gabriel Harris, the caretaker at Mount Auburn Cemetery. He used to live near there in the 1970s. He might remember something about the Parker family. Would you come with me to meet him? I'll pick you up in the morning. 6 o'clock. Thank you, Lucy. After hanging up, Elizabeth sat motionless in the dark. The living room light flickered again, on the verge of burning out. She suddenly felt freezing, as if a cold draft had just brushed past her back. In the reflection of the vanity mirror, she caught a glimpse of a man standing behind her. She spun around. No one. No, that's not possible, she stepped back in alarm. The light went out completely. The room was swallowed by darkness. Elizabeth screamed, Robert! Robert! He rushed out from the bedroom, flashlight in hand. What is it? There was a man in the mirror. Robert looked around. There's nothing here. Maybe you're just imagining things. I'll check the breaker. But Elizabeth knew what she'd seen was real. That feeling of being watched, those eyes, the same cold stare from the photograph, it was all coming to life. The next morning, Lucy picked her up in an old pickup truck. They drove for over 40 minutes to Mount Auburn Cemetery, a damp, silent place surrounded by drooping cypress trees. Gabriel Harris was a thin elderly man with silver hair, hunched shoulders, and a black felt hat. When Elizabeth mentioned the Parker family, he paused. What did you say? Julian Parker? Yes. I live at 14 Maple Avenue. He used to own the house. Gabriel looked down, his voice heavy. I remember them. Strange folks. In 1978, they all suddenly vanished. The police investigated but found nothing. But there was one thing. What? Elizabeth held her breath. Before they disappeared, I saw Julian arguing with 3 strange men right out on the street. One of them had a gun. The police called it a rumor, but I know what I saw. Lucy interjected, do you know who those 3 men were? Gabriel shook his head. No idea. But after that night, the house was locked up tight. No one dared go near it. Elizabeth looked at Lucy. The same realization appeared in both their eyes, this was no longer just a product of imagination. On the drive back, Elizabeth whispered, if Julian was being threatened, and his family didn't vanish because of some curse, then what really happened? Lucy placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll find out. But you need to be strong. That house hasn't told us everything yet. Elizabeth nodded, her gaze sharpening. Though still afraid, a part of her had awakened, the truth was waiting to be uncovered, and she was the one who had to do it for herself. Elizabeth woke at 3 a.m., heart pounding as if she'd just escaped a nightmare. In the dark, she reached for her phone but the screen stayed black. She flicked the bedside lamp. No light. The room was wrapped in a suffocating silence, broken only by the relentless tapping of rain on the roof. Robert, she whispered, voice dry with fear. But he was still asleep, softly snoring. The lights were out. Her phone was dead. Elizabeth crept into the hallway. The darkness swallowed everything, save for a sliver of moonlight filtering through the thin curtains. She followed the wall downstairs, her heart racing, hands trembling. On the ground floor, the hallway light was also dead. It seemed the power had been cut completely. As she passed the library, she suddenly heard a faint noise from the basement like a light scratching sound, then silence. Elizabeth froze. She swallowed hard and held her breath. 1 minute. 2. Nothing. She stepped back slowly, barely breathing. The next morning, Robert reset the main breaker and shook his head. Strange. No signs of a short circuit. Everything's working fine now. Must have been a temporary outage. And it just turned back on by itself. Elizabeth stared at him. Yeah, maybe. Robert replied, but the confused look in his eyes showed he wasn't certain. Elizabeth said nothing. She returned to the library, staring at the small door that led to the basement. She wasn't ready to go back down yet, but the scratching sound from last night echoed in her mind. That afternoon, a neighbor knocked at the door, a woman in her 50s, curly brown hair, wearing a blue sweater. She smiled politely. Hello. I'm Charlotte Hayes. I live at number 12 next door. I saw your car the other day and wanted to welcome you. Elizabeth was grateful to see someone normal and quickly invited her in. Thank you for coming. I'm Elizabeth, and this is my husband, Robert. After a few pleasantries, Charlotte sipped her tea and glanced around. I never thought anyone would move into this house again. Elizabeth frowned. You know something about it? Charlotte looked at her, speaking slowly. Just old stories. The family who lived here before, they vanished. You knew them? The Parkers? I met them a few times. Julian seemed off. He looked at everyone like they were out to get him. One time, I saw him digging in the backyard at night. Elizabeth and Robert exchanged glances. Charlotte went on. Then one day, the house was sealed shut. No one saw them again. Police looked into it, but they concluded they'd just moved away without notifying anyone. But I don't believe that. I heard screaming the night they disappeared. Elizabeth felt a chill creep down her spine. Did you ever come inside afterward? No. Everyone stayed away. People say this place is cursed. Robert chuckled awkwardly. Maybe people just have vivid imaginations. Charlotte stood, looking at Elizabeth. I'm not asking you to believe anything. But if you ever sense something strange, don't try to rationalize it. Trust your instincts. After she left, Elizabeth remained silent for a long time. Slowly, she went upstairs, pulled out Julian's old journal from the shelf, and flipped to the last page. She reread the scrawled lines she'd seen before but hadn't fully understood. They whisper in the dark. Once you hear them, you can't stop hearing them. The words echoed in her mind like a dark incantation. That night, Elizabeth decided to leave a voice recorder running while they slept to see if anything strange would happen. She placed the phone under her pillow, turned on the recorder, and closed her eyes. The next morning, she played the recording. The first minute was just the sound of Robert snoring. But around 3:26 a.m., beneath the quiet, she heard a voice whispering, "Let us go." Her heart stopped. She rewound. It was unmistakably human faint, almost right next to the microphone. But only she and Robert were in the room. She sprang up and found him brushing his teeth. "Did you say anything in your sleep last night?" "No." "Why?" I heard a strange voice on the recording." Robert frowned. "Elizabeth, you're driving yourself crazy. I really think we need a break. Why don't you go back to Boston for a few days?" Elizabeth looked at him, searching his eyes for understanding. But all she saw was concern and helplessness. She turned away and slipped the phone into her pocket. She didn't go back to Boston. Instead, she went to see Lucy. "You're sure it was a human voice?" Lucy asked. "I'm not imagining things. I recorded it. You can hear it yourself." Lucy listened to the audio, her face darkening. "We need to recheck the house plans. There might be a tunnel or hidden room. I know someone who specializes in historical home surveys, Daniel Martin. I'll call him." 3 days later, Daniel arrived, a man in his 40s, with a beard, wearing a gray t-shirt and carrying an EMF meter, thermal imaging gear, and old blueprints. After surveying the basement and ground floor, he returned to the library and pointed at the wall behind the bookshelf. "This wall has a hollow space behind it. But it's not on the original plans." Elizabeth blinked. "You mean, a hidden room?" "Possibly. I'll run a thermal scan." Daniel turned on his device and scanned along the wall. On the screen, a faint rectangular shape appeared. "Confirmed. There's an empty space about the size of a small room behind the stone wall." Lucy turned to Elizabeth, her tone serious. "We need to drill a small hole to look inside." Robert walked in at that moment. "What are you guys doing?" "Drilling into the wall." Elizabeth replied firmly. "We need to know what's back there. I'm not living in a house with secrets like this." Robert shook his head but didn't stop them. Daniel took out his drill and carefully bored a small hole. After a few minutes, he inserted the endoscope through the gap. "Holy shit," he pulled back suddenly. "What is it?" Elizabeth asked, tense. Daniel connected his phone to the camera and handed it to them. On the screen appeared a small, sealed stone-walled room, no door, no lights. In the middle stood a rusted iron bed. On the wall, more claw marks. And in the corner, the inspection light revealed a chair tied with ropes. Beneath it, a small object wrapped in cloth like a forgotten child's toy. Elizabeth felt her world collapse. She turned away, burying her face in her hands. Lucy said, "Someone was once imprisoned in there." Elizabeth whispered, "Not once. Maybe, something is still there." The morning was as gray as always, a thick fog blanketing the road leading to Elizabeth's house. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. The sound startled Elizabeth. She looked at the clock, 8:47 a.m. Who could be visiting at this hour? She walked to the door and opened it. A tall, thin man in his 50s stood there, wearing a black felt hat, a long coat, and mud-stained shoes. His hollow eyes stared directly at her. "Hello. Are you the new owner of this house?" he asked, his voice hoarse but clear. Elizabeth nodded. "Yes, I'm Elizabeth. And you are?" "Michael Gordon. I used to live across the street. Not in this house, but I knew Julian." Elizabeth's eyes widened. She invited him in, her heart beating with a mix of curiosity and unease. They sat in the living room. Michael sat upright, not leaning against the chair, his eyes scanning the house like he was taking inventory. Finally, he turned to Elizabeth, voice low. "I know I shouldn't have come back. But when I saw lights on in this house again after all these years, I couldn't stay away. You knew Julian Parker? Elizabeth asked softly. Michael nodded, his gaze darkening. He wasn't a good man. At first, everyone thought he was a successful businessman with a beautiful wife and lovely children. But beneath that was cruelty, selfishness, and unquenchable ambition. I read his journal. It was strange, like he thought someone was after him. Elizabeth opened the notebook, pointing to a few entries. Michael glanced at it, then sighed. He brought it on himself. Back in the 70s, Julian got involved in some shady financial scheme. He laundered money for a crime syndicate in Miami. But greed took over. He hid the money, betrayed his partners. And when the truth came out, they came for him. Elizabeth whispered. They wanted blood. I remember the night. It was December 1978. Thick snow. I saw 3 strange men enter this house. The lights stayed on all night. Then they went dark. The next day, no one ever saw the Parker family again. Elizabeth swallowed hard. She set the journal down, her hands clenched. Didn't the police investigate? Michael smirked. Julian had money, connections. When they disappeared, it was chalked up as a voluntary vanishing. Time passed, and people forgot. Elizabeth suddenly remembered the voice in the recording. Someone was imprisoned in this house. In the hidden room behind the wall. We found rope marks, dried blood, and a child's toy. Michael turned to her, and for the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. They held someone here. I don't know. Maybe one of the people who came to collect the debt, or someone in the family being punished. Michael fell silent, then said, "You should leave this place. It's no home for a person with a conscience." Elizabeth frowned. You think I can just walk away after learning all this? Someone suffered here, was betrayed, pleaded for help. I can't turn my back. Michael shook his head gently. You're brave, but reckless. Don't follow Julian's path. He stood and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. One last thing. If you ever hear whispers in the night, don't answer them. Even if they call your name. Then he was gone, leaving Elizabeth frozen in the cold living room. That night, Robert came home late after a meeting in Boston. Elizabeth sat alone in the library, her mind spinning with Michael's words. She replayed every sentence, every distant stare, every creak in the wooden floor like echoes from the past. The power went out again at exactly 11 p.m. This time, Elizabeth wasn't as afraid. She grabbed a flashlight, her backup phone, and headed straight to the basement. The stairs were dark and damp. She stood before the wall behind the bookshelf, where the hidden room was. She pressed her ear to it. Silence. She knocked 3 times. Still nothing. Then, a soft scratching sound. 1, 2, 3. She backed away. For the first time, her courage was truly tested. Breathing heavily, she pulled out her phone to record the sound. Nothing. She was about to leave when. Elizabeth. She froze. The whisper was soft, carried through the stone wall like a breeze, but it said her name. Who's there? She shouted. No reply. She bolted up the stairs, heart pounding like a war drum. When Robert opened the door and saw her pale face, he pulled her into his arms. What happened? What did you hear? Elizabeth whispered, still looking downward. It said my name. Robert held her tightly, saying nothing. He knew right now, no explanation would matter. The next day, Elizabeth and Lucy met again with Daniel. I'll try to break through the wall and open that room, Daniel said. But I'll need help. It could take all day. Lucy called a colleague in the restoration field, Samuel Taylor, an archaeological expert. He arrived with lightweight tools and a calm, serious demeanor. When Elizabeth greeted him, Samuel said, "Lucy told me everything. This goes beyond architecture. This is the remnant of a dark history." Elizabeth replied, "Then we need to dig it up. Whatever it is down there." By afternoon, part of the stone wall was broken through. The hidden room slowly revealed itself, light shining into a space that had been buried in darkness for decades. In the corner, Samuel found a charred file folder. The cover read, "Top Secret, January 1978. Inside were bank authorizations, copies of offshore accounts, and a handwritten letter from Julian. "I can't trust anyone anymore. Even Helen betrayed me. The truth must be buried here. If someone finds this, please forgive us. We have sinned." Elizabeth trembled as she held the paper. At this point, she no longer knew who was the victim and who was the monster. Lucy said softly, "Maybe Helen didn't disappear. Maybe Julian kept her prisoner." Elizabeth exhaled. "And maybe, she's the voice still whispering in the night." The sound of hammers echoed in the secret room behind the library. Samuel and Daniel took turns using their tools to remove the rest of the stone wall and widen the entrance to the small chamber. Elizabeth stood nearby, eyes fixed on the open frame where the light illuminated every detail: rope imprints on a table leg, dark dried blood on the floor, and in the corner, a pile of decayed documents wrapped in an old cloth. "We have to be careful with this stuff. If we handle it too roughly, it'll crumble," Samuel warned as he put on gloves and carefully lifted the fabric. He handed Elizabeth a stack of yellowed, scorched papers. She opened them with trembling fingers. They were a series of invoices, foreign bank statements, and scheduled money transfers. The recipient, Julian Parker. Bank, First National Bank of New York. Lucy looked over Elizabeth's shoulder. He was hiding money offshore. A lot of it. Samuel added, "Look at the signatures. Some of these weren't signed by Julian alone." Elizabeth looked up. "Who else?" "A man named Philip Roberts. Another was Howard Stevens. Both were shareholders in Parker Constructions in 1976. Elizabeth narrowed her eyes. "I've seen the name Roberts at the local library. I think he was arrested in 1981 for investment fraud." Samuel turned to the corner of the room, where a rusted safe sat. He tried opening it, it wouldn't budge. "We'll have to cut it open." As Daniel prepared the cutting tool, Elizabeth crouched down and picked up one final paper from the stack. It was a hastily written letter, the blue ink already smudged. "If anyone finds this, don't trust anyone who's ever lived here. Don't trust Robert. He knows." Elizabeth froze. "No, that can't be," she whispered. Lucy snatched the letter. "Elizabeth, are you sure there's no mistake?" "No. This is Julian's handwriting. It was in the same bundle of files he left behind." "But why mention Robert?" Daniel stopped the saw and turned around. "Did you just say Robert?" Elizabeth swallowed and nodded. Samuel looked at her carefully. "Is there any chance your husband had a connection to the Parker family? Even indirectly?" Elizabeth stood up abruptly, as if someone had slapped her across the face. "He's never said anything. He told me he only found this house because it was cheap and close to work." Lucy placed a hand on her shoulder. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but you need to ask him. This isn't a game anymore." That evening, Elizabeth sat in the living room, hands on her knees, head lowered. When Robert walked in and hung his coat, she didn't look up. "You've been in the library all day?" he asked gently. "Yes." "Did you find anything new?" "A lot. But there's one thing I want to ask you directly." Robert paused, his eyes suddenly alert. "What is it?" "Do you know Julian Parker?" The air thickened. Robert took several seconds before answering. "No. I've never met him." Are you sure? Because in the pile of documents I found, there was a line that said, "Don't trust Robert. He knows." Robert froze, then scoffed. More nonsense from that pile of old papers. Elizabeth, you're obsessing. I'm not crazy, Robert, she shouted, her eyes red with tears. I can't take it anymore. Every night the power cuts out, the whispers, the bloodstains, the bank documents, and now your name is in there. What else are you hiding from me? Robert gripped the arm of the chair, his face turning pale. You're accusing your husband based on some torn-up papers from 40 years ago. Fine. I'll tell you. But don't say I didn't warn you. Elizabeth froze. Robert looked her straight in the eyes. I knew this house used to belong to Julian. Because I'm Helen's cousin. My mother and she were first cousins. Our family forbade anyone from mentioning them after the disappearance. But when I saw this house up for sale, I knew I had to buy it. Why did you hide that from me? Elizabeth asked, trembling. Because I didn't want to scare you. And, because I needed to find out what really happened to them. So, you knew about the basement? About the secret room? No. I only knew the house had been sealed off. But when you started discovering things, I was afraid that if I told you, you'd leave. Elizabeth stood up, tears streaming down her face. You don't get it. I'm not afraid of the past. I'm afraid of being lied to. And you've made it so I can't trust anyone anymore. She ran upstairs and slammed the bedroom door shut. And on the table, a notebook, Julian's journal, flipped open on its own. Elizabeth stepped closer, her legs trembling. The page settled on a passage. I can't let Helen leave. She knows too much. She threatened to go to the police. I had no choice. Beneath the writing, a fresh red ink stain bled through the paper. No. Elizabeth whispered. Julian killed his wife. She covered her mouth, tears falling uncontrollably. The next morning, Samuel arrived with information he had retrieved from the criminal archives in Springfield. I found a copy of an anonymous letter sent to the Guardia Civil in 1982. The sender called himself William and claimed he had seen Julian lock Helen inside the room beneath the library. Elizabeth went silent. Who's William? Possibly the old gardener. But there's no full name. The police did nothing at the time due to lack of evidence. Lucy chimed in, well, now we have it. Physical evidence, the bank records, and the hidden room. Samuel nodded. Do you want me to contact the authorities? Elizabeth looked around the house. The stone wall had been opened. The secret room was no longer a secret. But inside her was still an endless pit. Not yet. I need one last thing. I need to know where Helen actually died. Samuel frowned. You think her body is still on the property? I don't think. I feel it. Lucy nodded gently. We'll search. But you have to be ready for what we might find. Elizabeth met their eyes, her voice firm. I've lost trust in too many people. I can't turn my back on the truth anymore. That morning, the gray sky stretched endlessly toward the horizon. A cold wind rustled through the dry trees in the yard, howling like voices from beneath the earth. Elizabeth sat silently in the library, clutching the anonymous letter Samuel had handed her. The scrawled words, William, were underlined 3 times. She reread the final lines. I heard her screams from beneath the stone floor. I tried to stop Julian. But he threatened my son. I could do nothing else. She folded the paper. Everything was clear now. Helen hadn't vanished. She had been imprisoned and killed by her own husband. And under this house, perhaps she still lay in silence and darkness, buried along with the disgusting secret of a shattered family. Robert entered, holding a cup of coffee. He looked at Elizabeth for a moment, then spoke. You didn't sleep at all? No. How far are you going to dig? Elizabeth looked up, her eyes fierce. All the way to hell if I have to. Until I know everything about this house. About Julian. About Helen. And about you. Robert set the cup down slowly. I already told you. I bought the house to find out the truth. And were you planning to keep that truth from me forever? If I hadn't discovered this myself, you'd have let me keep living right above a hidden grave without ever knowing? Robert didn't answer. His gaze darkened. I'm not Julian, Elizabeth. No. But you're repeating his mistakes, lying, hiding, and thinking you can control everything. The air was taut like a drawn wire. So what do you want now? Robert asked. The truth. All of it, Elizabeth said, clearly enunciating each word. Do you know where Helen died? Robert fell silent. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. There was one time, when I was a child, I visited here. My grandmother Helen's sister said that after a big argument, Julian locked Helen up. She heard banging on the basement door but was too scared to do anything. When she came back, Helen was gone. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Elizabeth screamed, her eyes bloodshot. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if the truth came out, my entire family would be disgraced. I lived under the Parker name as a child, bullied, rejected because of our family's dark past. I just wanted to close that chapter. By silently burying the body of an innocent woman. Robert stood and walked closer to her. Elizabeth. I love you. I only wanted to protect you from all that ugliness. Elizabeth laughed bitterly, her voice cracking. You love me. But you let me sleep right above her corpse. You let me hear cries for help every night without understanding what they were. That's love. She stepped back, tears flowing like a river. Is there anything else you're hiding? Did you know about the room behind the wall? The safe? The bank accounts? Robert didn't meet her gaze. I knew about the account. I found out in college, when reading some of her old legal documents. But I never touched it. I swear. What else? Elizabeth shouted. Robert said nothing. Fine. Then tonight I'll go down to the basement myself. I'll find Helen. I'll bring the truth to light, even if I have to tear up the entire floor. That night, Elizabeth packed a high-powered flashlight, spare batteries, a small dagger, and Julian's journal. She went down to the basement at exactly 11 p.m. Robert didn't stop her, only stood at the stairs watching. Elizabeth, if you don't come back in 30 minutes, I'll come down. No need. She pushed open the door to the stone room behind the wall and stepped into the cold, silent space. Her flashlight cut through every corner. She began inspecting the stone floor, each tile, each crack. Eventually, she spotted something strange, a stone slab slightly different in color from the rest. Elizabeth knelt down and tapped it. A hollow sound echoed. There was an empty space underneath. She stepped back, pulled a crowbar from her bag, and began prying the slab loose. After 3 strenuous tries, a crack opened. A foul stench of decaying flesh rushed out. Covering her nose, she shined the light down. Below was a small pit. Inside, a curled-up human skeleton wrapped in old fabric. Beside it, a comb and a circular pendant necklace engraved with the initials EP. Helen Parker, Elizabeth whispered. She turned and called out loudly. Robert! Get down here! He rushed in and saw her beside the pit. His eyes widened. Oh my God! Can you look? Elizabeth said coldly. This is the woman your uncle murdered. The one you let me share a house with for weeks without saying a word. Robert fell to his knees, tears falling. I'm so sorry. Elizabeth stood up and stared at him like a stranger. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Robert. But I know what I have to do." The next morning, the local police, the mayor's office, and the press gathered outside the house. Samuel, Lucy, and even Daniel were present. Elizabeth stood in the living room, holding a microphone, her voice firm. "I'm Elizabeth Foster. What I'm about to share is not rumor, not legend, but truth uncovered from within this very house." She presented the evidence: bank records, Julian's handwritten letters, the anonymous letter from William, photographs of the secret room, audio recordings of the whispers, and finally, Helen's necklace. Everyone was silent. Lucy stepped forward to add, "This is a murder that was hidden for nearly 50 years. Helen Parker was imprisoned and killed by her husband, after she threatened to expose his illegal financial dealings." The police officer quietly took notes. A female reporter raised her hand. "Do you intend to leave the house after all this?" Elizabeth looked up. "No. This house is no longer a hiding place for crime. It is now a symbol of justice." A small but firm round of applause broke out. Elizabeth turned to Robert, who was standing behind the group. His gaze was filled with a mix of regret and gratitude. She said nothing. There was still a long road ahead for them. But at least, today, the truth had been spoken. That night, the house was silent as if no one had ever lived there. After the morning's press conference, the journalists had left, and the police had withdrawn, awaiting forensic results from the burial pit in the basement. Samuel and Daniel returned to Springfield, and Lucy stayed one more night, but she slept at a nearby hotel. Once again, Elizabeth was alone with Robert, the man who, though still called husband, now felt as distant as the pit beneath the stone floor. Elizabeth sat alone in the library, holding Julian's journal, the last page partially torn. A soft yellow lamp lit her weary face. The room was no longer a vault of secrets, but an arena for spirits nameless dead, exposed lies, and emotions that had rotted in silence. Robert entered, his footsteps quiet like a thief's. "You're still awake." "How could I sleep?" she replied without looking at him. He sat in the chair opposite her, fingers interlaced. "I know I was wrong. But I don't know where to begin making it right." Elizabeth closed the journal and placed it on the table. "You don't have to make it right. You just have to answer one question." "Ask it." "When you knew Helen had been murdered by Julian and might be buried beneath the floor, why didn't you go to the police?" Robert stayed silent. Then he spoke, voice barely a breath. "Because I thought, if I did, no one would ever believe in my family again. The Parker name was already stained. I just wanted to bury it deep." "And bury your wife with it?" Elizabeth said, like a knife. Robert didn't respond. "You don't understand, Robert," she continued, eyes blazing. "I lived here. It invaded me every night. I heard the screams, the whispers, the scratching at the walls. I thought I was going mad. And all the while, you knew, and you let it happen." Robert hung his head, his voice shaking. "I was afraid. Afraid you'd leave me. Afraid you'd hate my bloodline." Elizabeth stood abruptly. "No, Robert. What makes me want to leave you isn't your blood. It's your cowardice." She walked out of the library without looking back. Near midnight, Elizabeth stood on the second-floor balcony, looking down at the dark garden. Wind howled through the window cracks, bringing a biting cold. The trees swayed like dead arms trying to claw their way out of the earth. She dialed Lucy. "I can't stay here tonight. It's suffocating. I'm scared of the person next to me." Lucy responded immediately. "I'm coming to get you. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Elizabeth hung up, grabbed her coat and bag, and went downstairs. As she passed the library, she heard a strange sound. Clack, clack, clack. She froze. The sound came from inside the hidden room behind the stone wall the police had temporarily sealed with a wooden panel that morning. Elizabeth stepped back, then moved forward. She couldn't run forever. She had to face it one last time. She entered the room, turned on her phone's flashlight. The beam lit up the wooden wall. Clack, clack, clack. This time, the sound was clearer. Like fingernails tapping on wood. Is someone there? She asked, voice trembling. No answer. She gathered all her courage and tapped 3 times. Clack, clack, clack. Silence. Suddenly, the house's power cut out completely. Elizabeth screamed. Robert. No response. She turned on her backup flashlight and ran out of the room. Robert? She heard something crash upstairs. She sprinted up to the bedroom. The door was wide open. No one was inside. The bed was a mess, the bedside lamp had fallen to the floor. On the wall, written in blood or something dark red were the words. We are not at rest. Elizabeth gasped, stumbling backward. She rushed downstairs to find her phone. The screen was shattered. No signal. Then, she heard footsteps. From the basement. Slowly, cautiously, Elizabeth moved toward the library. The door to the basement was open. She stepped down the stairs, flashlight flickering. Robert? She called. No one. She entered the stone room. The air was so cold it stung her skin. In the center of the room on the ground was Robert. He was curled up, blood on his forehead, eyes wide open, mouth agape. Elizabeth ran to him and shook him. Robert. Oh God. What happened? He gasped. Someone pushed me. Elizabeth looked around. No one. Did you see their face? No. But, the whispers, they came back. She pulled him up, helped him up the stairs. Lucy arrived just then, stepping through the front door. Oh my God. What happened? Call an ambulance. Now. Elizabeth screamed. An hour later, Robert was taken to the local hospital. His injuries were minor, but his mental state was in extreme panic. The doctor diagnosed acute panic attack. Robert kept repeating. It's down there. Helen, or something else, it won't let go. Lucy held Elizabeth's shoulders as they sat in the hallway. You can't stay in that house tonight. I know. But Helen. I don't think she's truly free yet. Lucy looked at her friend, voice low. Maybe, the truth isn't enough. Maybe there has to be forgiveness. Elizabeth nodded, tears falling. I'll go back. One last time. To tell her. That we know. That she's not forgotten. The next afternoon, Elizabeth returned to the house alone. No police. No reporters. Just her and the empty house. She went down to the basement, stepped into the stone room once more. She knelt by the old burial pit and whispered. Helen. I know you went through something terrible. I'm not part of your family. But I am a witness, and I promise, your name won't be forgotten. The air was icy cold. But then, a gentle breeze stirred, lighting a candle nearby, a candle no one had lit. Elizabeth stood, looked around one last time. For the first time in many nights, she heard no whispers. She climbed the stairs and shut the basement door. And for the first time locked it from the outside. 3 days after Helen's body was unearthed and Robert was hospitalized from the shock, Elizabeth barely left the house. Public interest had temporarily faded, but within the old house, the silence had never felt heavier. That afternoon, Lucy returned with a tall middle-aged woman with neat brown hair, thin glasses, and a thick folder. Elizabeth, let me introduce you. This is Laura Edwards, a historian from Boston. She's written books about mysterious disappearances in suburban areas during the 70s. Laura extended her hand, her voice deep but warm. Very pleased to meet you, Elizabeth. I've been following your case in the papers. Your courage has earned our entire research institute's respect. Elizabeth shook her hand, still showing a hint of skepticism. I just did what was right. But if you can help me truly understand what happened here, then maybe I'll feel at peace. Laura nodded and opened her folder. I reviewed all documents related to the Parker family between 1974 and 1979. There are several noteworthy findings. She pulled out a photocopy with red markings. This is the initial investigation report from 1979. It states that Julian Parker withdrew all the cash from 3 Swiss accounts totaling nearly $2 million at the time. But the money was never transferred to the U.S. The bank confirmed it disappeared with Julian. He took the money and killed his wife and fled. Elizabeth asked. Laura shook her head. Not quite. Julian was never confirmed to be alive in any other country. That's just a theory. But one detail stands out. She held up another file. Julian didn't work alone. There were 3 co-founders of the Parker Construction Company, Philip Roberts, Howard Stevens, and a lesser-known name Louis Henderson. He vanished at the same time as Julian. Lucy frowned. I've never seen that name in any of the documents we found. Exactly why I found it suspicious, Laura continued. Louis Henderson handled the company's accounting. He was known as the financial shadow. Elizabeth fell silent, then asked quietly. You think Louis betrayed Julian? Laura nodded. Yes. Among the files I uncovered, there's a document showing that Louis transferred $400,000 to an account under the name C. Delgado in the Bahamas. And guess what? Laura flipped to the next page. C. Delgado was Howard Stevens' alias when he registered a real estate company in early 1980, less than 2 months after the Parker family disappeared. Elizabeth exhaled sharply. They turned on Julian, and took everything. Laura continued, her tone grave. I believe they planned to kill Julian, but he found out. He struck back, locked up Helen, hid the money, and prepared to flee. But something went wrong, and everything collapsed. Lucy added. Maybe Louis killed Julian to tie up loose ends. Elizabeth shook her head. No. If Julian was murdered, where is his body? And Helen, she was locked up and died, but why didn't Julian just kill her, if he was that cruel? Laura paused in thought, then replied. Maybe Julian thought he'd come back. Maybe he planned to keep Helen as a hostage in case he needed leverage. And then, Elizabeth whispered, he disappeared. Because his accomplices silenced him. Laura nodded. Very likely. Elizabeth sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Can we prove it? Is there a way to bring all of this to light? Laura pulled out another file. This is the most important part. A money transfer document from a Swiss account bearing Julian's fingerprint matching the DNA from a fingernail fragment police retrieved from the stone room. That confirms Julian returned to this house after the supposed disappearance. And he left evidence. Lucy was stunned. So, Julian may have come back after everyone thought he'd escaped. Laura nodded. Exactly. And it's possible, that's when he was killed. Elizabeth's voice trembled. You think Julian's body is somewhere in this house too? Laura gripped Elizabeth's hand, voice firm. I do. And if that's true, then this ends here. All the crimes exposed. They won't be able to run anymore. Elizabeth looked deeply into Laura's eyes and felt she had finally found a true ally. Not because Laura was an expert, but because she too was fighting for justice, not for fame, not for money, but for the forgotten souls. 2 days later, Samuel and Daniel returned with an archaeological team assisting the investigation. Laura led them down to the basement, identifying a suspicious spot based on thermal imaging data from a previous scan. In the right-hand corner of the stone room, near the floor, the thermal camera showed an area of unusual temperature suggesting an empty space below. "We drill here," Samuel said. An hour later, the drill pierced through the stone. Using a probe, they detected a void about 70 centimeters deep. "There's something down there," Daniel exclaimed. Lucy held her breath. "Dig." Each layer of dirt removed peeled back a layer of buried history. By dusk, they uncovered an old metal box. Inside it was a human skeleton. Laura pulled out an evidence bag containing a gold ring engraved with the initials, JP, a Swiss wristwatch stopped since 1979, and a broken bone fragment with dried blood. Elizabeth knelt, looking at the remains. "Julian Parker." Lucy placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now they've all been found." Laura spoke softly. "And we have everything we need to bring the truth to light." News of the second skeleton discovered in the basement of 14 Maple Avenue spread rapidly throughout the city. Major newspapers like the Boston Globe and Boston Herald ran headlines. "Parker family disappearance of 1978, horrifying truth unearthed after 47 years." Local television camped outside the house for days. Police confirmed, DNA from the remains matched records from Julian Parker's maternal relatives. Lead investigator Henry Lewis addressed the press. "We have sufficient evidence to confirm, Julian Parker was murdered and buried in his own home, shortly after killing his wife, Helen Parker." At a special press conference held at Boston City Hall, Elizabeth, Laura, and Lucy were invited as official witnesses. The room was packed, camera lenses aimed directly at the podium. Elizabeth, in a white blouse with her hair neatly tied back, stood before the microphone with a calm, almost cold demeanor. But in her eyes, fatigue mingled with determination quieted the entire room. "I stand here today not as a hero, but as living proof that the past, no matter how deeply buried, can rise again. The house my husband and I moved into had once been the site of something horrific, a conspiracy, a string of murders, and decades of lies." She raised two photos, one of Helen, one of Julian. "These are not just two people who died. They represent opposing truths, the victim and the perpetrator. But without the light of truth, both become forgotten shadows." Reporters raised their hands. One asked, "Are you related to the Parker family in any way?" Elizabeth answered firmly, "No. I was just someone who happened to live in their house. And that's exactly why I couldn't stay silent." Laura stepped up. "We found everything: bank records, handwritten letters, evidence of wire transfers, even biological traces. What was hidden for decades is now exposed." Lucy approached the podium, her expression resolute. "We've uncovered another critical detail: the last surviving accomplice, Howard Stevens, currently running a real estate firm in Miami, was the recipient of the wire transfer from Lewis Henderson in 1979. Legal proceedings are now being forwarded to the criminal court." A murmur spread through the room. Another reporter asked, "Ms. Elizabeth, do you feel you were used by your husband since he's a descendant of this family?" The atmosphere turned heavy. Elizabeth lifted her head, her voice slow but razor-sharp. "I feel betrayed. But that pain is what pushed me deeper. It was the silence of his family that killed Helen. And I refuse to be silent ever again." After the press conference, the case was officially reopened with 3 suspects. Howard Stevens, financial accomplice. Lewis Henderson, accountant, prime suspect in Julian's murder. William Anderson, former gardener, silent witness. Just 2 weeks later, police arrested Howard at a villa on the outskirts of Miami. He didn't resist. In his confession, Howard bowed his head and admitted, "Julian was dangerous. He threatened to expose all of us unless we split the money. Lewis couldn't take the pressure. He was the one who killed Julian. I just stayed silent." Elizabeth watched the news from home, her heart heavy. She didn't feel victorious, only saw a long chain of bad choices and people who chose silence over courage, allowing pain to linger for decades. Robert returned home at the end of the month after nearly 3 weeks of psychological treatment. He was visibly thinner, his eyes softer, though still haunted. Elizabeth greeted him in silence. They sat in the living room, not speaking for 10 minutes. Finally, Robert broke the silence. "I know I don't deserve to come back. But if you'll allow me, I want to make it right, little by little." Elizabeth looked at him, not angry anymore, but not ready to forgive either. "Do you truly understand what happened, Robert?" He nodded. "Helen wasn't just a victim. She was the voice your whole family crushed. And by staying silent, I was part of it." "You're right," Elizabeth said softly. "I want to start over. Not to forget the past, but to live in a way that honors what you did." She didn't respond right away. But inside, a door creaked open. A month later, Elizabeth was officially invited to speak at Harvard University during the symposium Unnamed History, When Ordinary People Face the Truth. Laura sat beside her, proudly listening. "We often think history belongs to books," Elizabeth said, "but the truth is, it lies beneath our feet in every stone, every fear, every unspoken darkness. And sometimes, all it takes is one person who refuses to close their eyes, for everything to come to light." After the talk, many students approached for autographs, some even hugged her, crying. At that moment, Elizabeth realized she had done what no one else had in 47 years, given voice to the dead. Lucy and Daniel took charge of renovating the house. Elizabeth decided not to sell it. She wanted to live there not as before, but as a keeper of memory. "We'll rebuild everything," Lucy said. "The basement will become a mini exhibition. The stone room, we'll remove it and create a memorial garden instead." "A garden for Helen," Elizabeth whispered. Robert volunteered to help with the construction, and for the first time, Elizabeth nodded in agreement. 3 months later, the house looked entirely different. The old walls were freshly painted, the windows larger, sunlight pouring in. The living room where press conferences were once held now displayed a portrait of Helen alongside the words, "We are no longer silent." A small ceremony was held, with neighbors and journalists who had followed the story from the start in attendance. Elizabeth stepped onto the second-floor balcony, smiling at the crowd below. Laura stood beside her and asked gently, "You okay?" "More than okay. I feel light. Like this house, can finally breathe." In the garden, the wind rustled the newly planted trees. At the heart of the memorial, a stone slab was engraved with Helen Parker 1938–1978. Buried in silence. Freed by truth. Elizabeth placed her hand on the stone and whispered, "Rest now, Helen. We heard you." This story shows the power of truth and courage. Silence in the face of evil only prolongs the crime, while confronting the past, no matter how painful, is the only path to healing. Elizabeth didn't run. She chose to fight. Even after betrayal, she remained steadfast in seeking justice for those who had died. The greatest lesson: the past may be buried, but it will never be forgotten so long as someone dares to listen and act in its name.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.